All right. Well, first of all, thanks so much for all of you for giving us a little bit of your Thursday night. This is unfortunately not going to be the Yankees and the Giants or the Astros and the White Sox or anybody else who's starting off on opening day today. But I appreciate you taking a half hour, 45 minutes, hour, whatever we end up being here to talk through a little bit about the Brotherhood assessment that SigEp has been doing now for the last several years. I'm going to stop talking here real quick, but just as a quick introduction, my name is Chad Stegemiller. I'm the Fraternity Managing Director on the SigEp staff, and this is one of the things that obviously our team looks at as we look at different ways and different things that we need to be doing to better serve our chapters and better identify things that may be coming down the line that we just need to be aware of and help you as volunteers potentially be aware of, and as chapter leaders help them be aware of. So definitely a helpful tool on our end, and I think especially now that we're this was year number 5, I believe, into this process for SigEp, being able to see that over time and see how trends have kind of morphed and gone different directions. So from my seat, I appreciate all of you being here and giving us a little bit of your time. Also excited, some of you probably recognize him, I know from the chat, others maybe a new face, but Gentry McCreary, who is with Dyad Strategies. Dyad is the group that runs the show, so to speak, with the assessment and the questionnaire, crunches the data and really helps us with all the reports and pulling out information from the raw data. And he's going to run the show from here on out. We will have a Q&A session at the end. We'll try to do that through the question and answer feature there in Zoom. So go ahead and type those in there. I'll keep an eye on them, and then I'll kind of toss those to Gentry once we get to the end of the session. But if something pops up, type it in there, and we'll circle back on those once he gets done with his presentation. But Gentry, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chad, and echo Chad's thank you to everyone for being here tonight. My Cincinnati Reds have already lost today, so season's off to a great start. So we've got a lot to look forward to. Really excited to be able to join you tonight. Coming at you from Knoxville, Tennessee. Bryce, you could have just come over and we could have hung out, had a cocktail and poured one out for Tennessee Alpha. Heard that news yesterday. Was sorry to hear it. My name is Gentry McCreary. I run Dyad Strategies. We're an applied research firm. We are now partnered with 20 groups at the national level, so 13 fraternities and 7 sororities. Just added our newest group last week on the sorority side. Alpha Xi Delta is our newest org partner on the sorority side, so really excited to welcome them. We also do campus-based projects as well, so do anywhere from 25 to 30, where campuses will bring us in and we'll gather some of the same data, help them make sense of that, and help chapter leaders make sense of that. We just got back this morning from a few days down in Baton Rouge, working with the community down there at LSU. So wanted to spend some time tonight just kind of diving into the chapter report. And really my goal is pretty simple. I've literally just pulled some screen grabs of your all's chapter report. So we're going to go through that, walk through all the data points, help you understand what those things are measuring, what they mean, why they're important, and talk a little bit about some of the things that we know you make a difference as it relates to some of those data points. If you identify that as a deficiency or an area for improvement within your chapter. So let me share my screen here, get my slides pulled up, and we will jump right in. So a little bit about our research, 13 national fraternities that we're partnered with. So when we benchmark SigEp's data, we're benchmarking it against a large group of data from other fraternities. Beta Theta Pi is in that group, Delta Upsilon in that group, Pi Kappa Phi, Phi Gamma Delta, Phi Delt, Lambda Chi, so some other big national groups that are part of that benchmark data set. And we're doing, as I shared, about 30 projects annually. The N for our fraternity survey data was about 75,000 students last year. And that's a really big number. I don't know this, but my guess is that this is the biggest longitudinal data set anywhere in terms of in-depth measures looking at fraternity and sorority chapter culture. And the longitudinal data that we have goes all the way back to 2016. That was the first year we began some of the longitudinal data gathering with our national fraternity partners. As Chad mentioned, the data that we gathered in the fall and that are in your chapter reports is the 5th year of data collection in this project with SigEp. So we now have some really interesting trends that we can look at both at the chapter level as well as at the fraternity level. So that's a little bit about what we do. I really like the way SigEp organizes their reports. So we use our dashboarding feature to build those chapter reports for our clients if they request it. But each client looks different, right? They get to do some design work, and we've got someone on the back end who helps put those together. And I particularly like the way that you all have organized that report. 3 main sections: people, experiences, environments, right? So who are the people who are joining SigEp and why are they joining? What experiences are they have while they are in the fraternity? And then what are the environments that they are experiencing that are impacting the fraternity experience and their membership? So I think that's a neat concept. It's a very clean way to look at the data, and I think just conceptually helps me make sense of what we look at. So we'll start with the first section, which is the people section. And the first data point that you'll see in your report is a thing we measure called motivation to join. This is something that we began measuring at Brian Warren's behest. You all really are the impetus for this thing that we built that we're now measuring with almost all of our national clients and with a lot of campuses as well. Brian had the great insight several years ago that ultimately SigEp can't be different as a fraternity unless the people who join are different, right? Unless they're looking for a different fraternity experience. And so we did some focus groups to understand the various reasons why students might be interested in joining fraternities. And then we built a measure that measures those motivations. We're able to uniquely measure 4. This isn't to say that these are the only 4. They are the 4 that are the most salient. So if you sit down and you talk to a fraternity member and you say, hey, why were you interested in being in a fraternity? You're probably going to get one or some combination of these answers. And so I'll kind of walk you through them here and help you understand kind of what these data points mean. The first one on the left is the social status or the social benefits motivation. You'll hear me use those terms interchangeably. But what we're looking at here is those the motivation around, I want to be in a fraternity because I want to be able to enjoy the social benefits that come along with being in a fraternity, the status that is conferred upon me once I become a member of a fraternity, the party scene, the social culture, all the social benefits, right? And so this one is one that we know drives a lot of problematic behavior at the chapter level. We've presented at a few national conferences, Brian and myself, other folks from the SigEp team, how social motivation drives risk at the chapter level. Chapters with higher concentrations of socially motivated joiners have more issues with alcohol. They have more issues with hazing. Really clear connection between chapters that have a lot of students with high social benefits motivation and some of the risk factors that we see. So a lower score on this is better. These are all measured on a 1 to 5 Likert type scale. So there's a number of items related to that motivation. So, a social benefits item might be, one of the best parts of being in a fraternity is the parties that I get to go to. And they can 5 strongly agree with that statement, or they can 1 strongly disagree with that statement. So we're measuring kind of why they think they want to be there, what the point of them being in a fraternity is. We really like to see that score at 3 or lower. And what you can see on your report is you see your chapter's data over time. So you got a data point for 2019, 2020, and that's juxtaposed against the national average in SigEp, right? So when we look at all SigEp chapters, what does that look like in terms of how your chapter compares? So your chapter is in the bar graph. National average within all SigEp is the gold line there, and that'll be a consistent theme throughout the presentation. So with the social benefits motivation, ideal score is less than 3. 3 is general disagreement, that no, the social benefits aren't that important. That's not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something else, leadership or networking or a place to belong. The others are more altruistic. This one really is the only one that when you look at correlations is a bit more problematic. And so we like to see a lower score there. Probably the most altruistic, the one where we like to see the highest score, is in the belonging motivation, right? So these are the people who say, I want to be in a fraternity because I'm looking for a home away from home. I'm looking for a place to feel connected. I'm looking for a group of men to really feel a sense of affinity and connection to. And so we know that belonging drives a lot of positive things, right? So chapters that have higher concentrations of members who have belonging motivation tend to have lower risk scores and better outcomes around brotherhood, affinity, satisfaction, et cetera. So belonging is one where we really like to see a high score. And you can see, again, where this chapter falls in relation to the national average. And this was just a chapter that I picked at random, blanked out all of the identifiable information. So thank you to the random mystery chapter who provided the screen grabs for my presentation tonight. The third motivation is this networking motivation. And that's this idea that the relationships that I form during my fraternity membership are going to benefit me both during and after college. So these people that I get connected to will be able to help me get plugged in on campus, get connected to other people, but also those relationships will benefit me after college days are over when it comes to internships and jobs and making those connections as a postgraduate. And again, a good motivation, a healthy motivation, positively correlated with a lot of good things. And then lastly, this idea of a leadership and involvement motivation, that I'm looking for a place to get plugged in. I want to be involved. I see this as a good opportunity to hone and refine my leadership skills. And being in SigEp can help me not only become a better leader, but get me plugged into other leadership opportunities on campus. And again, with that motivation, the higher the score, the better. So obviously in SigEp, as we track these over time, what we really want to dial in on is ideally, if what we're doing is working, is that social benefits will go down, all the other benefits will increase. What we've seen over the last couple of years, and you can see in this slide, is that just all the motivations across the board have gone up. The students who are joining fraternities, and this is true in SigEp and it's true everywhere, are just generally more motivated along all four of these constructs. But you can, again, look at your chapter's data and see what that trend line looks like. If you're seeing really sharp increases at the chapter level in the social motivation, that's a red flag. That's a, hey, we want to stop. What is it? Why are we attracting more and more of these socially motivated guys, knowing that those people are, again, they're going to be more likely to want to have a more socially dominated fraternity experience, an experience that's more dominated by the alcohol scene, the party scene, the social culture. So again, ideally, we're seeing the social benefits motivation go down, and we're seeing the others increase over time. The second section of the report has to do with experiences. So when we began this project, we sat down and we looked at the values that are espoused in the Balanced Man curriculum, right? So looking at all the things that you all have as an organization said, as a result of being a member of SigEp, as a result of going through this Balanced Man experience, how should we be learning? How should we be growing? How should we be changing individually? What are the things that I should see change on myself as a result of being in this organization over a period of 4 years? And so there's a number of measures that we've mapped here. Openness to diversity. This is a very widely used measure that looks at the interest that you have in interacting with and learning from people who are different from you, right? So am I interested in being in this bubble where I only hang out with people who are like me and think like me and share the same ideas and values as me? Or am I interested in learning from and spending time with people who are different from me? So a higher score here is better. We want the college experience to be a time of exposure to new ideas, a time of challenge, a time of learning and growth. And so a lot of that comes, and a ton of research on this, that some of the most profound learning that happens during the college years is the learning that occurs by just getting to know and hear about the experiences and to learn the perspectives of people who are different from you, who have a different lived experience from you. The second one is this idea of love. And I know enough about SigEp's ritual to know that love is something that's very important. I've never read your ritual, but I can see your symbols. I roomed with a couple of SigEps my senior year at UT. I feel like I know a little bit, and I know that concept of brotherly love is really important within the fraternity. This is something that should grow over time, loving one another, appreciating one another, putting the well-being of others above our own well-being. And that's really kind of how that is conceptualized in the way that we measure it, that I love my brother so much that I will unselfishly sometimes put their needs over my own. So again, higher score, the better there. We break this down in your chapter report longitudinally. So you can see your chapter average, but you can also see how that breaks down freshmen, your sophomores, your juniors, your seniors. And again, the gold dotted line shows you the overall average for SigEp on that measure. The third experience we look at is leadership skills. We ask a number of questions related to the frequency with which people find that they use their voice to influence others, create an environment that empowers and enables other people to lead, where they hold themselves to a high standard and lead by example. So we did a number of focus groups as we were building out this measure, asking what does good leadership in a fraternity look like? And so built a series of measures related to leadership based on how your members really think about what it means to be a good leader within the fraternity experience. And so again, you can see what that data looks like. So all of these higher scores are better. And ideally, what we see is that these grow from freshman year to senior year. If you're in this organization that is teaching these things and reinforcing these things, we would expect that over time, we're seeing growth in these areas, that all of these experiences are becoming more profoundly impactful as I continue my matriculation in the organization. Next set of experiences, a little bit more directly related to some of the hard professional development outcomes that are connected to the Balanced Man program. So this idea of lifelong learning is this idea that one should be intellectually curious, that I'm interested in learning. I'm interested in learning about the world around me. I'm interested in learning from my mistakes. I'm interested in self-discovery, challenging the things I think I know by seeking out new information. So again, a widely used measure in the field of higher education. And this is one where, again, we really think about the intellectual growth as part of the Balanced Man program. This is really what we're talking about, that intellectual curiosity that we want our students to develop. Professional preparedness, this has to do with their feelings of confidence in their ability to be successful, their feelings of confidence in their chosen career path, that they have self-efficacy around their ability to leave college and be successful and have a successful career. Being in a fraternity should build that self-efficacy and that self-confidence while you're going through the curricular college experience that after 4 years, you should feel better. You should feel more confident about your ability to go out and be successful in the post-collegiate world. We also measure confidence and self-efficacy around both written and verbal communication skills, right? So writing self-efficacy, very self-explanatory, your self-confidence in your written abilities and your ability to articulate yourself through the written word. Speaking confidence is a reverse scored measure. So what we're actually measuring here is kind of the lack of confidence, the anxiety that one feels with regards to speaking in front of a group or speaking one-on-one, making small talk, getting to know someone that they don't know. And so a higher score means there's less anxiety, so more confidence around one's ability to verbally communicate. And again, membership in a fraternity should absolutely give people the opportunities to engage in both of those ways, both getting up and speaking in front of a group, as well as making those one-on-one connections. And so again, like to see growth on all of these from freshman year to senior year. We also measure within the experience department the overall levels of satisfaction within the fraternity. So, and this is one that is on a 1 to 10 scale, not a 1 to 5 scale, and it's a single item measure. It's a very simple measure. We say on a 1 to 10 scale, how satisfied are you with your experience in SigEp? And so that's a really important marker that just looks at the overall quality of the experience. And we use this data point to look at a number of different things. One of the things that I really appreciate about SigEp's data, and this is one of the ways where you're a bit different than some of your other peers, satisfaction tends to go down over time. So freshmen tend to be the most satisfied with their fraternity experience. And then we typically see a really sharp decline between the freshman year and the senior year. And we do see a little bit of a decline in SigEp. So you can see in 2022, at the national level, we went from a 8.73 with our freshmen down to a 8.02 for seniors. But that relative to other fraternities is a much smaller decline than we typically see. The national average is about 1.5 decline between freshman year and senior year on that overall satisfaction measure. So that's a really good piece of news for SigEp. When we lay those lines across one another, you do a better job than other fraternities maintaining member engagement, maintaining high levels of satisfaction from freshman year to senior year. I think that's a very strong indicator of the fact that the things you're doing with the Balanced Man program, particularly around keeping upperclassmen engaged, are really having an impact, because we can see a really distinct difference between SigEp and some of the other fraternities that we're working with. So again, the higher the score, the better. And ideally, your line at the chapter level in terms of that decline from freshman year to senior year is pretty flat. And hopefully we get to a point at some point where those lines are going up, that people continue to become more fulfilled and more satisfied through their membership in the organization. Transitioning to the last section of the report, we study environment. So what are the things going on within the culture of the chapter that are influencing some of those experiences that we just talked about? Our research really began, and my business and then research partner, Dr. Joshua Schutz, who's a Pike from Southern Mississippi. He and I were doctoral students. I was finishing up at Alabama. He was finishing up at Southern Miss. I had this idea of, as I was talking to fraternity members in my doctoral dissertation about hazing, guys kept using the word brotherhood. And it just dawned on me one day that people don't always mean the same thing when they use that word, that word means different things to different people. So, had this kind of revelation, called Josh, we got together, did some focus groups, built the prototype of the survey. And this is really what got us working together. This was kind of our original academic collaboration and led to the work that we do now. And what we found in that research is that if you asked all of the members of your chapter to write down their definition of brotherhood, you would get a lot of different answers, but you could take all of those different answers and more or less neatly lump them into one of 4 categories. There's 4 distinct ways that men think about brotherhood. In our research, we call these the schema of brotherhood. Schema is a framework. It's a way of thinking about something. And there are 4 different ways that men think about and conceptualize brotherhood. So I'll walk you through each of these. The first one on the left is brotherhood based on solidarity. So that's this idea that brotherhood is about this group of people who support one another, who have one another's back. If my brother needs me, I'm going to be there for him because I know that he'll be there for me. These are often reinforced in our ritual. A lot of fraternity ritual is derived from Masonic ritual. I'm a master Freemason, so I can look at symbols and make some educated guesses about what's going on there. Very clear that a lot of fraternities really reinforce this idea of mutual assistance, mutual aid, helping one another, assisting one another. Solidarity is often very directly referenced and reinforced in our rituals. So it's a really powerful aspect of brotherhood. What we've learned in our research is that solidarity within a chapter can be both too low and it can be too high. And so what you'll see on this set of data is that you've got a shaded area that kind of gives us our ideal range. What's the ideal score on each of these schema of brotherhood? And what we see for solidarity is that it's kind of in the 3.5 to 3.9 range on that 5-point scale. If this gets too low in a chapter, lower than a 3.5, your members are basically saying, well, I don't feel like my brothers support me. I don't feel like they have my back. And that's not healthy. You need a healthy amount of solidarity. But as this one passes 3.9, gets closer to 4, and certainly as it passes 4, that's where we start to see solidarity getting too high. And when it gets too high in a chapter, it can almost manifest itself as kind of a gang mentality. This idea, well, that I would have my brother's back no matter what. I would never rat out a brother. I would never tell on a brother, we keep each other's secrets. It becomes a very insular environment. If that gets too high, it becomes correlated with attitudes about hazing. Talk about some of our hazing data in just a minute. A lot of chapters will use hazing as a means to achieve solidarity. We're going to put you through a difficult experience, and that's going to bring you together as a pledge class. We want that bonded, unified pledge class. And so solidarity, again, that ideal range between a 3.5 and a 3.8, 3.9, somewhere in that neighborhood. The second aspect of brotherhood is what we call brotherhood based on shared social experiences. This is the fun side of brotherhood. This is the sense of camaraderie that comes about as a result of all the fun that we do together, all the fun that we have together, the fun things that we do together. So if that's hanging out around the house, or going on road trips, or tailgating, or whatever it is, the sense of camaraderie, the fun, the relationships that come about as a result of that, that's what brotherhood is all about. And like solidarity, shared social experiences has a sweet spot. It can be too low and it can be too high. And again, kind of between a 3.5 and a 4 is where we would say that ideal range is. Lower than a 3.5, you basically have guys saying, this isn't fun. I'm not enjoying it. I don't feel a sense of camaraderie. I'm not having positive social experiences. If anything, being in a fraternity should be fun. So if this gets low in a chapter, it can be a death knell. It can really be problematic. If this score gets too low, can really drive down satisfaction, retention. That can be highly problematic. But as this one gets too high, as this one surpasses 4, and certainly the further beyond 4 it moves, what we see is that it becomes a big driver of problematic social culture. If it's all about the social experience, if all we care about is that sense of fun, that sense of camaraderie, it drives alcohol use, it can drive hazing, it can drive a number of different things that we measure that are problematic as it relates to social culture. So again, we see that shared social experiences has kind of a sweet spot. The third, and I would argue most important aspect of brotherhood is brotherhood based on belonging. And that's this idea that brotherhood is more than just a group of guys that I hang out with. This is more than just a group of guys who have my back. This is a place where I really feel at home. This is a place where I really feel connected. I feel valued. I feel like people care about me. I feel like I matter. That this notion of mattering, I feel like I matter to the people in this group, and it really feels like home. It feels like family. This is the biggest driver of that overall satisfaction measure that we talked about a minute ago. The more you feel like you belong, the more likely you are to feel satisfied. It's the biggest driver of commitment. People are more emotionally committed and feel a stronger sense of obligation the more they feel like they belong. And when you study this, over time, what we find is that belonging is the biggest driver of retention, right? So the more likely, the higher your belonging score, the more likely you are to stay involved and engaged all 4 years. In fact, I can look at someone's belonging score their freshman year and can predict with a pretty high degree of certainty whether or not they'll still be active in your chapter by the end of their junior year. It's that strong of a predictor. With about 80% confidence, we can look at a freshman year belonging score and predict whether or not they'll still be in the chapter by the end of their junior year. So this aspect of Brotherhood, really, really important. So when you think about the new member process and the way you socialize and onboard new members, building those meaningful relationships, giving them opportunities to be emotionally vulnerable with one another as a new member class, but also to build those meaningful connections, meaningful relationships with upperclassmen, really, really important. I've even, I've gotten on the stump lately that I feel like when we call the person in charge of our new member process the new member educator, that implies that the most important thing they do is educate. The things that they teach is the most important thing. And I disagree with that completely. I think the most important role that the new member coordinator plays is the socialization of the new members, the way that they help them build relationships with one another and with other members of the chapter. The learning is important. The things that they learn about the fraternity is certainly important, but I would argue that the quality of the relationships that they build during that time is of greater importance. So I'm lobbying for us to change the name from new member educator to something else, because we know that that first semester has such a profound experience and or profound impact in terms of creating that sense of belonging that can then really show some positive residual effect over time. The last aspect of Brotherhood is this idea of Brotherhood based on accountability. My brothers push me to be a better man. We hold one another to high standards. It means something to be a SigEp. We have values that are derived from our ritual. And from those values, we derive very specific behavioral standards in terms of how we are expected to engage with one another and engage with others and act on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes Brotherhood means having those difficult conversations of holding one another accountable. Again, the higher the score, the better here. We like to see a high accountability score. We want our chapter members to feel comfortable holding one another accountable. If you identify this one as a deficiency, what we've learned in the work that we've done in studying chapters with really strong Brotherhood is that chapters that have really strong Brotherhood, there's nothing really special or remarkable about their formal systems of accountability. They have a standards board or a J board, and they use it to some extent when they need to. Well, what we find in these remarkable chapters is that their informal systems of accountability are really, really strong. That their peer-to-peer systems of accountability are really strong. So if I see someone engaged in behavior that's problematic, I'm worried about someone's substance use, I'm worried about the way someone is treating their significant other, I'm not going to send them to standards. I'm not going to complain to exec or to an advisor. I feel comfortable enough and love and care about that brother enough to sit down and have that difficult conversation with him myself. And when we ask those chapters, well, why are you so comfortable doing that? They actually fall back on belonging, right? That we have a really strong connection with one another. We know one another in really deep and meaningful ways, which makes those difficult conversations easier. And sure enough, we see that quantitatively. When you look at these in a statistical model, you can think of Brotherhood as 4 distinct things, but you can also think of it as one bigger thing with 4 subcomponents. And what we find in that statistical model is that all 4 aspects of Brotherhood are correlated with one another, but the strongest correlation between all of them is the correlation between belonging and accountability. If you have deep, meaningful relationships with one another, it makes that informal accountability, those tough peer-to-peer conversations, much easier. And there's a lot of research out there right now that this generation of students in particular struggles with that. That as adolescents, they had much less experience resolving conflict. This is a side result of helicopter parenting. And certainly the pandemic, the students coming to us now who spent their sophomore, junior, senior years of high school behind a screen and getting very little face-to-face interaction with their peers, we would expect them to have an even bigger deficiency in some of those conflict resolution areas. So you think about, again, your new member process, your onboarding process, teaching how to navigate healthy conflict, giving them an opportunity to navigate healthy conflict, and building those deeper, meaningful relationships can really yield some dividends down the road when it comes to building a strong sense of accountability within a chapter. So these 4 aspects of brotherhood, critically important, right? I can look just at a chapter's brotherhood score, nothing else. And we measure 30 to 40 data points with a lot of our clients. Not even everything that we measure in SigEp is in your chapter report, but I can look just at these 4 data points and tell you an awful lot about a chapter, what's going on culturally, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and how that's playing out. A chapter with low belonging is going to have low engagement, a lot of apathy, people who don't care, people who don't come around. A chapter with high belonging, they don't have to threaten people with fines for not coming to chapter meeting, because when it feels like your family, when it feels like home away from home, people want to be there, right? They're showing up. They're always there. So these 4 are really important to focus on and to look at where your chapter is in comparison to kind of that ideal range and that ideal profile, and to adjust accordingly, right? So that these 4 data points are critically important. We also measure some things around social culture. Really, the only behavioral stuff we ask about in our research has to do with alcohol use. We do ask students to self-report how many days per week on average they have 5 or more drinks in one setting, which is the standard measure of binge drinking. So this alcohol use is on a 0 to 7 scale. They could say I go out 0 nights per week and have 5 or more drinks, or I go out 7 nights per week and have 5 or more drinks. And so what we give you here is just a trend line in your chapter. Are drinking patterns moving in a good direction, in a problematic direction? Are they staying the same? And then the other thing that we look at here, it's one of my favorite things that we measure, one of my other favorite data points. It's a thing that we measure called social status importance. How much your members care about the chapter's place in the social hierarchy on campus, that social pecking order. Every Greek system has this perceived social hierarchy. There are these, socially elite, quote unquote, top tier fraternities and sororities, and everyone's aware of who's in that top tier. And then there's the group in the middle, the middle tier groups that, they're good. They're not the best, but they're good. They're solid. And then you've got everyone else. I always say it would be mean to call them bottom tier. We would say they're upwardly mobile or aspirational, but these are the groups that don't have much social clout. And everyone's aware of where they are. And a lot of groups care a lot about maintaining more social status or attaining more social status or maintaining the social status that they have. One of the really interesting things that we've seen, we wrote a white paper about this. If you follow us, our 2021 white paper dealt with the fact that we saw during COVID and continue to see significant spikes in this measure over the last 3 years. And you can see it here with this chapter. This chapter went from just under a 3 in 2019, now up to basically a 3.4. That's about 15 to 20 standard deviations. That's a massive shift over when we're looking at data sets this large. Students now, particularly those of you who are at regional comprehensive universities, so your directional schools, your Middle Tennessee states. I was at Missouri State University last week. We're seeing an even more profound growth there as those students who are kind of on the fence about joining, who are interested in Greek life, but more for the leadership and networking and involvement motivations are less likely to join. And the socially motivated joiners are joining in higher and higher concentrations. As numbers overall are going down on those campuses, we've seen tremendous spikes in social status importance. People care a lot more now than they did just a few years ago about their chapter's place in the social pecking order. That's problematic because this drives a lot of problematic behavior. If you're trying to maintain or achieve social status, how might you do that? How might that impact who you recruit? How might that impact the type of social environment that you decide to create within a chapter? Oh, we're going to get social status by having the most parties or the biggest, wildest parties, so this can, if this gets too high in a chapter, drive a lot of problematic behavior. So we don't want to see chapters caring too much about this. But what we've seen is a really significant increase in this over the last few years, not just within SigEp, across all fraternities. It's quite troubling. The next set of data points examine attitudes around hazing. And what we're measuring here really, I would argue, is philosophy around hazing. What is it you think you're achieving by the things that you do to your new members? And there are 4. I don't like the way this is displayed in the chapter report, because it's clearly there's some text in this box, but you have to click on it and you can't print it out. It's only visible if you're looking at this document electronically. So I want to pretty that up. I'm going to have our data guys go in and tweak that a little bit. I don't like the way this is displayed, and didn't notice it until I was in playing with this tonight. But there are 4 different motivations that we measure here as it relates to why students haze, what they think they're accomplishing. The one I want to pay particular attention to is this purple line at the bottom. That's the social dominance motivation. So sometimes the hazing is about reinforcing the power dynamics and the hierarchy within the group. I'm up here, you're down here. I have power over you. You're just a freshman. I can make you do things. I can make you clean. I can make you run errands. I can make you drink. I can make you do whatever I want to make you do because I have power. And I had to do it when I was a freshman, and now I get to make you do those things. This one is by far and away the most problematic in its correlation with other things. It's connected to hazing severity, connected to unethical behavior, conformity, a number of different things. This is another one where, and you can see it in this chapter, gone from a 2.04 up to a 2.6. So more than a half a point on a 5-point scale. That is a massive, massive shift. And we've seen that sort of a shift across the board in all of our fraternities at the national level, really spiking in 2020 during the first year of the pandemic. And it has stayed elevated. All of a sudden now, our fraternity chapters care a lot more about this idea of a new member process in which new members have to earn it by doing all those subservient things, those things that reinforce the hierarchy within the group. So that's something very particular to pay attention to within your chapter, that earn it mindset and how it's showing up, and making sure we're pushing back on that mentality. That brotherhood membership is earned over 4 years. It's not earned as a new member. You don't earn your letters by running errands. You earn those letters by knowing what they mean and living those values out every day. So that's another troubling trend that we're seeing in our data nationally. The red line here is loyalty and commitment motivation. So that's this idea that we're going to put you through a difficult experience because we want to see how committed you are. And we're going to weed out those people who are not fully committed. And the idea is that if you make it through that difficult experience, you will be more loyal and committed at the end. This one's also highly problematic when you look at its correlation with other things: alcohol use, hazing severity, a number of things related to kind of unethical behavior and conformity. So this is one that we also want to see go down over time. We've seen some small spikes in this over time nationally, but not quite as big of a spike as we've seen with the social dominance motivation. The lighter yellow line is what we call the solidarity motivation. So that's this idea that the new member process is designed around building that bonded unified pledge class. So very similar to solidarity brotherhood, but in this case, it's a hazing motivation. So this is, why are we doing the things we're doing to our new members? Because we want to bond the pledge class together. We want to build that solid sense of solidarity. And then lastly, the brown or dark gold line is the most altruistic of the four. That is the instrumental education motivation. This is the motivation that says that there are things you need to learn. And the purpose of the new member process is teaching and reinforcing those things. but hazing can get caught up in that, right? So, Matt, you have to learn the creed, you have to memorize the founders, and you have to memorize the Greek alphabet, and you didn't memorize it in the allotted time. So now we're going to, line you up and yell at you or make you do push-ups or whatever that might look like. So there can be hazing connected to that educational motivation. So these are really important to track over time. And certainly if you see spikes in these two, in the loyalty, commitment motivation, or the social dominance motivation, that's something you definitely want to pay attention to, because that can be indicative of problems coming down the road. We've done some longitudinal analyses of chapters that have been closed for hazing, and we've looked at how different they were from their peers. Were they outliers on any of our metrics in the years leading up to their closure? And they were all outliers on these two measures. These are two of the best predictors of chapters that are going to have issues with hazing, to the extent that it might lead to chapter closure. So if you're seeing increasing scores here, if you're seeing higher scores here, that's definitely something that you want to pay attention to, and sit down with your new member educator, sit down with your chapter, and talk about the problem with that earn it mindset and how that really breeds toxicity in a chapter. A lot of good interventions that you can have, conversations that you can have around that notion. The last data point here really quickly, and then we'll stop and answer questions, has to do with attitudes around sexual assault. Obviously something that we pay a lot of attention to. There's been a lot of emphasis on this topic in recent years. Fraternities, I think, have done a really remarkable job as it relates to educating around this topic and really leading in a lot of ways on the quality of education around this topic. And we've seen over time that these things have made a big difference. So the top bar here, the gold bar, this is survivor support. This is one where we always want to see a high score. This means that they have attitudes that if a friend came to them and said they were assaulted, I would support them. I would believe them. I would listen to them. I would do all the good things that we would want them to do in that situation. So with that one, a higher score is better. This yellow line is very specific to the chapter context, how we would respond if a brother were accused of sexual assault. So this idea of solidarity around, if a brother were accused, we would blindly defend him. We would castigate the person who's accusing him. And so here we see a lower score as better. We don't want our members to just blindly support one another. We want members to hold one another accountable. And so we want to see that moving in a good direction. The red line is minimization. This idea that I minimize the severity of sexual assault. I would minimize the impact of sexual assault on a friend who came to me and said they were assaulted. Oh, are you sure that's an assault? You're not just talking about a drunk hookup. You're not just talking about regretted sex. So these attitudes that would minimize someone's trauma, minimize someone's experience, and try to redefine it in a less traumatic way. And then lastly, the purple line is victim blaming mindset. So basically the opposite of the survivor support mindset, that we would blame the victim of sexual assault for what happened to them. Well, why did you drink so much? Why were you dressed so provocatively? That we would assign blame to them for something bad that happened to them. So obviously on all of those, lower scores are better. And that captures all the things that we're measuring on the environment section of the Brotherhood and chapter report. So with that, covered a lot of different data points, and I've tried to help you understand not only what these things are, but why they matter in terms of chapter culture. But what I'd like to do is spend our last 10 minutes or so just answering any questions that you all have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll kick it over to Chad to kind of moderate the Q&A here.
Thank you, Gentry, and I'll give you a second to grab a drink of water, whatever you might need, because you've been talking here for a bit. There are only 2 questions in there so far, and one of them is actually for me, so I'll take that one first. The question was, to what extent are findings from these surveys, especially the belonging and vulnerability, incorporated into VMP programming? Are there more plans in these areas? And I think the short answer is yes. There are definitely plans in these areas to include some of the stuff that we've learned through the last 5 years, not just the most recent stuff, into what gets incorporated into BMP programming as we evaluate what that needs to look like moving forward. So absolutely, a lot of the stuff that Gentry said, I feel like I'm in the choir at this point. If you have the term preaching to the choir, like I feel like I've heard it enough that I'm drinking the Kool-Aid and I'm bought in, and we're definitely looking at.
I don't even know why I do these trainings anymore. I mean, you some of you all have heard this so much, right? You could probably do it better than me.
So, Gentry, one question that did come in from your friend Bryce there at Tennessee. In the experience data, in that data, is it better understood by watching the flow from year to year and how it changes over time in a cohort?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, when you're looking at your chapter, seeing those trends is really important. So the benchmarking is important, right? So knowing what is our chapter like compared to the average SigEp chapter. But a lot of these are driven by campus context, right? So alcohol use at Tennessee or Alabama isn't going to look like alcohol use at Duke or Vanderbilt, right? I mean, they're different institutions with different social cultures, with students of differing academic ability, different levels of focus. So campus level differences on some of these measures really are important and do explain a lot of the variance. That's why I like doing this work at the campus level, because we're able to help chapters contextualize their data within the campus culture, right? So how are we drinking relative to other fraternities on campus, or what are our hazing attitudes relative to other fraternities on campus? But I do think benchmarking with the experience data in particular is helpful, because those are things that are, while not unique to SigEp, they are uniquely mapped to things that are important to SigEp, right? So these are things that we say, regardless of campus culture, as a result of being a SigEp, as a result of going through the Balanced Man program, you should be getting better at these things, right? So benchmarking against that SigEp data point, and then looking both over time. So over time, what are those data points doing? Are we getting better at delivering this program or not? And then between classes, are we seeing growth between freshman year and senior year? Are we seeing stagnation, or hopefully not, but in some cases, are we seeing declines? And if we're seeing declines, then we really need to dig in and look, right? Like, why is brotherly love getting worse over time instead of better? I would say that's a big red flag, right? So I do think it's important to look at it in both ways, both from a benchmarking context over time, but then also looking at those differences from year to year, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, especially on those things that we know are mapped to the Balanced Man program, because again, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's us saying, these are the things we say we're delivering through this program. Are we really delivering it? Are students learning and growing in the ways we say they ought to be as a result of going through this experience?
Great. Another question that pops up here. You didn't really touch on it, and I didn't really ask you to dive into it, so I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here. Obviously, we're focusing a lot on SigEp's data, and you've mentioned other organizations that you work with, throughout the Greek community. What are you seeing with SigEp's data versus other people's data? Like, are the things that SigEp is doing working? Is there value in, going dry? Is there value in SigEp learning communities and going to the Balanced Man process? Are you seeing that when you look at our data versus some of the other folks that are out there, without throwing anybody under the bus by name?
Without a doubt. When we look at SigEp's data, SigEp is frankly an outlier. We see SigEp have some of the healthiest, not some of the healthiest social culture. So when we look at alcohol use, for example, SigEp is always at the bottom of the list, right? The lowest levels of self-reported alcohol use across the board when we look at all of our fraternities, and that includes other fraternities that have substance-free housing. You all have the lowest scores as it relates to alcohol use. You have the lowest scores as it relates to the social motivation in terms of the motivation to join. You're getting a lot more through the Balanced Man Scholarship Program, through the way you recruit. You're getting a lot less of those socially motivated joiners and a lot more of everything else, right, as it relates to people who want leadership, who want belonging, who want networking. So it's definitely making a difference there. All of the risk variables, even beyond alcohol use, so like the social experience, brotherhood among the lowest, solidarity, brotherhood, right there in the ideal range, and then really healthy belonging and accountability scores. And the other thing that we're seeing in SigEp is that satisfaction is going up over time. Everyone's satisfaction took a dip during the first year of COVID, but when you look at the overall trend line, SigEp members are becoming more and more satisfied. So as more and more chapters get bought in to this way of doing things, as more and more chapters become really consistent with what we expect in a balanced man chapter, there's no question that they like it. They like it better, and they're becoming more satisfied, and they are more satisfied than the average fraternity member in our data set. So there is no question in my mind, based on the data that I see and that I've presented to SigEp staff and to SigEp's board, that the things you all are doing are absolutely making a tremendous difference when we benchmark against other fraternities.
Thank you. Another couple questions. I'm going to kind of smash them into one here that have come in. Talking about kind of the information coming into the survey. So 2 points that are in the messages that I see here. One, how do you guys adjust, or do you adjust for the group that goes in and just marks all ones or all fives, or just, you know, to expedite getting through the survey? And then the second one is, does the data, or how do you account for you know, chapters who have lower participation levels, with the assumption that there's probably the more bought in and the more, you know, the more potentially aligned report here? Like, are there, you know, potentially getting only one side of the story from that chapter?
Yeah, totally.
What kind of things do you guys do with the data to kind of address those concerns?
Great question. So one, yes, we use in our survey software some filters that will filter out those responses where guys just go down marking all ones or all fives, or making Christmas trees or zigzag lines. So we turn those filters on. So any responses that come in through that get pulled out. Those get thrown away. Surprisingly, very little, less than about 0.5% of those responses get kicked out. So most guys, if they're going to bother to sit down and take the survey, we're finding are actually taking the survey. They're actually responding. And we know that because the external validity is really strong. Things that should be correlated with one another are correlated with one another, right? So social experience, brotherhood should be correlated with alcohol use. If you look at a data set and it's not, that would cause some serious concern, but we still see really strong external validity in that things that should be related to one another are related to one another. So we know that students are telling us at least an element of the truth. Even with alcohol use, we assume that those data are underreported. We assume that people don't tell us the truth when it comes to their alcohol use, that they underreport how frequently they binge drink, for example. But that measure still has external validity. You still see a lot of variance with the alcohol use questions that vary from chapter to chapter. The chapters you would expect to be higher are higher, and they correlate with the things that you would expect them to correlate with. So while students are maybe not telling us the truth, we can assume that they're more or less under equal motivation to lie. So they're all lying to pretty much the same point. So while those data may not be accurate, comparatively, they're still meaningful, right? So I can look at one chapter and say, well, do I think their binge drinking rate's actually a 1.5? No, maybe it's a 2.5. Maybe it's a 3. I don't know. But I can look at a chapter that's at a 1.5 and a chapter that's at a 2 and say, I feel very confident that this chapter binge drinks more frequently than this chapter. So those numbers comparatively are still very meaningful.
Absolutely. Looking at the motivation to join section, there's those 4 silos, 4 pillars in that section. Is there any data or any, I guess, conclusions that you can pull looking at those relative to each other for a chapter? Obviously, you talked about like the good zones for those areas, but if you look at them as a 4 as a total, is there anything that you can look at or see there that as you look across the spectrum, you know, that maybe you wouldn't catch with just one of those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can absolutely answer that question as it relates to brotherhood because we've been studying it longer. We've published a lot more related to the brotherhood research. I don't know that it's as clear with the motivation to join because we've only begun measuring that in the last couple of years, and we've not published anything related to that data, so we've not put it out there as much. My guess is this: the most important combination to look at is the belonging motivation score to the social benefits motivation score. The gap between those two are going to tell you a lot about the culture of the chapter. If those two are pretty close together, or God forbid, the social benefits motivation is higher than the belonging motivation, that's going to be problematic. That's going to spell trouble for a chapter. But the bigger that gap, we've got guys joining for the most altruistic reason, which is belonging, connection, family, meaningful relationships, and are the least interested in the social stuff, the fun, the parties, the alcohol. That gap analysis is maybe the most important one. So as you're looking at that data over time and looking at those scores in combination with one another, that's the one I'd really pay attention to. Is over time, is the gap between social benefits and belonging getting bigger, or is it decreasing? That's really where I would really focus in on.
Great. And I have one more for you here. How do you, from your perspective, and knowing we have a lot of volunteers on the call here this evening, sometimes the data doesn't align with the actions that they're seeing. The data is saying that maybe, you know, that they don't see hazing in the chapter, but the data is saying, hey, that there maybe is are members who are leaning that way, or having ideas that way. How do you help? How would you advise them to help draw those lines, or to interpret that when data is telling them something than what their eyes and ears are telling them, at least right now?
Yeah, the hazing data is, it's important to note that it's attitudinal. We don't ask students what you do, right? Tell us how much you haze your new members, because if we did that, they wouldn't tell us the truth at all, right? You think you're going to get dishonest answers with alcohol use. Wait till you try and ask behavioral questions around hazing. And we've done it. You get no variance. You get no external validity, no correlations. I am suspicious of any research. And I've said this to my colleagues who are doing this research. I am suspicious, based on my own experience, of any research that's trying to examine the prevalence of hazing by asking fraternity members to talk about or answer in a survey the hazing that they're actually experiencing. So we're measuring attitudes around hazing. Do attitudes always align with behaviors? No, not at all. So you could have an environment where guys look around and they see what the other fraternities on campus are doing, and they're like, well, yeah, maybe I wish we could haze our pledges a little more. I wish we could make our new guys earn it a little bit more, right? Maybe that's something I think, but I know that in SigEp, that's not acceptable. And I've got an advisor who I know is watching, and I've got a national headquarters who's coaching me on what I should be doing instead. That doesn't mean I can't still think that. But what I will say is that if you see those trends over time, particularly those social dominance and loyalty commitment motivations really moving in a problematic direction, I would say it's almost inevitable that you're going to see a problem, right? And you may not see it yet. Those could be the canary in the coal mine, right? That we're seeing member attitudes shift in a really significant and problematic way. Doesn't mean we've got a hazing problem yet, but it means we need to be having some really serious conversations, engaging in some really serious interventions to make sure we're doing something to prevent the actual problem from happening. But yeah, attitudes and behaviors, two different things. I fully believe that students can hold a belief that is not necessarily an accurate reflection of what they're actually doing in the chapter, particularly when it comes to some of those hazing motivations.
Absolutely. Well, Gentry, once again, I think, I appreciate your time this evening. I appreciate you walking through this stuff, with the folks here on the call, because I think, there's good information there. But as I said to you when we first started talking about doing this, sometimes when you look at charts and graphs and things like that, they can be overwhelming really quickly. And I think having somebody walk through them, and kind of saying, hey, here's the important stuff, and here's what you should be looking at, I think is definitely helpful. And you have been willing and able to do this, as you've said multiple times over, and it's always appreciated. Once again, to everybody who joined in on the call, I appreciate you taking some time on your Thursday evening, whether it's dinner time out on the West Coast or maybe bedtime almost for folks here on the East Coast. Gentry just threw his email address into the chat. I'm assuming that means that if you have questions or you want to reach out to Gentry, feel free
Please
to do
follow
so.
up. Yep.
And definitely do that. And a last plug I will say is we did also have a conversation with all of our regional directors here at March staff when they were back in Richmond to walk through kind of not to the level that Gentry can, because he certainly knows this better than they do, but how to kind of work with our members with those reports and our volunteers. So if you have a regional director headed to town, definitely, you know, and you have a report, don't hesitate to bring this up to them, because they're happy to help you in your process to try to maybe address some of these things with your chapters. But if you, again, and Gentry's email's in there, my email is also at the top of the chat as well. If you have any questions from the SigEp end, please do not hesitate to reach out. But once again, thanks everybody for joining this evening.
Thank you all. Good luck.